you for your good intentions in coming to this gathering and participating. May Allah reward those who organize these programs and sponsor them. Alhamdulillah, it's a blessing to once again be with you in this masjid. I wasn't planning on being here. I wasn't planning on traveling for the Arbaeen this year, but Allah had different plans, and Alhamdulillah, it's a tawfiq and a blessing to be amongst you in these evenings, inshallah. Brothers and sisters, for tonight, inshallah, it's an introduction to my topic, which is the topic of indifference and apathy. And what I mean by indifference and apathy is when we're in a state where we just don't care. And the motivation for this topic is reflecting on Ashura and connecting Ashura to Arbaeen. It's been close to 40 days now since we were together, and we spent that time, and we came, we participated, inshallah, we shed some tears, we expressed our mourning and our grief for Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And now that 40 days have passed, what has taken place? What is the state of our soul? What is the state of our spiritual awakenedness? If we go back in history and we look at what happened after Ashura, I think there's some very important lessons that we can learn. And when we talk about connecting Arbaeen back then to Arbaeen right now for us. So we know that there were those who had the honor of becoming shuhada, and they became martyrs on the day of Ashura. But not everyone had that honor. There were the prisoners, of course, who had to continue their struggle. And then there were others who, for whatever reason, they had love of Ahlul Bayt. They were supporters of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim as-salam, but for whatever reason, they were not able to be part of the caravan of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. What happened to them? What was their reaction? When news started to come to them, what did they do? And we look back in history and we see that it's very interesting to look at different examples of how people reacted and how they did not react to what took place on the day of Ashura. So we have the group of people who, of course, they reacted right away and they were with Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And then there were those who weren't. And amongst them, we have different people. We have those who, for example, when they became aware of what took place, they protested and they spoke up. And they did something that was so risky that some of them actually became martyrs. We've heard the stories of, for example, in Kufa, there were some who were there who, when they heard about what happened, they spoke up right then and there. And Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad had them killed. We had others who protested in different ways. There were some, for example, we're told that some people, they stopped talking. Right? There's one famous, Sufi, at least I don't know how historically accurate this is, but one of my good teachers who was a researcher in the area of, Ashura and the events of Ashura, he mentioned this, that one of the famous Sufis, that he was so overcome by what took place that he stopped talking to the people for a number of years. I believe it was like 10 years or something. He's like, I'm not going to talk to people anymore. Right? He was so, affected by it. There was another man who in Kufa, he hid himself from the people. He was so disgusted with what took place. He's like, I don't want to even see anyone anymore. So he hid himself. It took a month for people to find him. And then when they find him, then he composes like this famous poem about what people did to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. The gist of it is, that they killed off, the essence of takbir and tahleel when they killed you. Takbir meaning, the act of magnifying Allah and saying Allahu Akbar. Tahleel meaning the act of saying La ilaha illallah. Meaning that what the crime that was committed was so grave that this is what took place. There were those who said that we need to move away from, we can't stand to be near the people who were involved with this action and this crime. And so they said that we're done. They did hijrah. They moved away, for example, from Kufa, and they said, we're done. And then you have people like Jabir ibn Abdullah al-Ansari and Atiyah. Right? They, and of course we'll talk about that more in the upcoming days, but they somehow were inspired. We can perhaps venture to say that it was perhaps with the instruction of the Ahlul Bayt, perhaps with the guidance of Ahlul Bayt. We don't know. But somehow they were inspired to perform this incredibly historically important ziyarah. How many people? 2 people. And you see how when you do something and you do it with the right intention and you do it at the right time, how Allah gives that barakah. And suddenly, like now you see, in recent years, 20 million, 25 million, right? And, if the media were to cover it and give it its due coverage, right? People would be like shaking. They'd be like, what on earth is happening here? What kind of a tremendous event is taking place that we have so many people coming together? Imagine the power of change and transformation through that. But that's back then, right? We have these different reactions. Now, I mentioned how many examples? Maybe 5, 6 examples. And maybe if we were to go back, we could come with another 5, 10, 15, 20. We could talk about the Tawabin. We could talk about the Qiyam of Mukhtar and etc., etc. Right? But, and here's my point, and this is an important point. The vast majority of people probably didn't do that much. Do you agree? Okay, the people who needed to, they did. And eventually we know that the events of Ashura, they led to the downfall of the Umayyads and so many other things afterwards. But the masses, the vast majority of people, they didn't do that much, or they didn't do anything. And when I look at that, and I think back and I look at myself, personally, I'm concerned. I'm concerned when I see that vast majority of people aren't moved when terrible things like this happen. Vast majority of people don't come to the aid of their imam when he calls for help. Vast majority of people perhaps aren't affected the way they ought to when it comes to the events that took place and when it comes to their commemoration of them. There was something that I had read about 40 days ago, and I want to share it with you tonight. It was something that really stuck with me, and I think it's something that's practical and something that gives perspective on the topic I'm going to, inshallah, be explaining. Many of the brothers and sisters here, mashallah, alhamdulillah, are familiar with Ziyarat Ashura and the incredible power that this ziyarah has. I mean, I can see that in this center, you give importance to Ziyarat Ashura. And there's a reason behind that. It's because of how much it's been emphasized, how, the narrations concerning it, the greatest of our ulama putting emphasis on it. I'm sure that you're familiar with this practice which has been recommended by the great ulama, which is that if you can, if possible, if it's something which you find yourself spiritually inclined to do, it's a good practice to have a 40-day recitation of Ziyarat Ashura, which begins when? On the day of Ashura, and it ends when? Roughly speaking, around the day of Arbaeen. If you count the number of days, it's either going to be 39 or 40 days, so you might add one day like afterwards. So it's a 40 days of doing Ziyarat Ashura. I'm sure that you've heard about this practice, and I'm sure many of you perhaps are practicing this as well. Okay? Now, it's very interesting when you go to the words and the advice and the teachings of the wisest and the greatest of our ulama. They have instructions regarding this. They tell us the etiquette. They tell us how to do this because it's so important. They explain that if you want to have the maximum impact, you have to do it in this particular way. One of those points that they mention is something which really shook me, and I want to share it with you this evening. they say the following. They say that if during the 40 days somebody commits a sin غير عامدانه, meaning without intending to do so, not that they had planned it from beforehand. If somebody commits a sin like without prior planning, kind of it just came up, then the question is, should they end the 40 days right there or should they continue? And the answer is that they should continue the 40 days and then they should redo the 40 days in a state of tahara and spiritual purity, because that's what's fitting for somebody who's doing a 40-day ziyarah of Ashura. And when I saw that, I was like, wow. I was just like, what sort of expectation do the Ahlul Bayt have for those who are truly committed to their path? That for 40 days when they're doing ziyarat of Ashura, God forbid that we should even commit a sin which is just unplanned and just happens like that. Right? It really is something to think about ourselves and the effect of these 40 days, what it's supposed to leave on us. Now, please don't get me wrong. Right? I know that sometimes we attend these majalis and we're looking for hope and inspiration. We're maybe at a spiritual low. And sometimes we hear these things, we're like, oh my God, I'm just doomed. I'm nothing. I'm a failure, right? I'm so far away from what that person's talking about. Sometimes, we don't mention these things from the minbar because we don't want people to get discouraged. But sometimes we mention them. Why? In order for us to get encouraged and for us to see that there is some goal that's up there that we want to at least be moving in the direction of trying to attain it. Even if we don't get there, at least we set our sights on that goal and we see what we can do to get there. So this was an introduction to, inshallah, help us reflect on this question, that how can we prevent ourselves from becoming people who are apathetic, indifferent, but rather we want to be inspired with the example of someone like Jabir and someone like Atiyah, these great companions of the Ahlul Bayt, who, when they have these 40 days, they use it in the right way and they're able to pull off something which is incredibly impactful in history, which is the first ziyarah of the Arbaeen. So inshallah, I'll be talking tonight and introducing this topic of spiritual indifference by using a story from the incidents that took place leading up to Karbala. Inshallah, you can help me with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, the incident I want to narrate here is something that I'm sure you've heard before, but it's really worth us, going back to this frequently and pondering upon it. Every time you go back to these type of things, you can take a new takeaway. And I'm going to mention tonight, I'm going to mention tomorrow night, because there's a lot that we can take from it. This is from the journey of Imam Hussein alayhi salam when he is about to leave Medina and he's about to go towards Mecca. You know why? He was being threatened, he was being forced to give bay'ah to Yazid. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam decided to leave with his family and not be forced to take the bay'ah, and this is part of the journey which is going to eventually lead him to Karbala. Now in Medina, news starts to spread and different people start to come and visit him. One of those individuals' name is Abdullah ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar ibn al-Khattab is the one who is famously known as the second Khalifa, the one who was selected by the first Khalifa to take over after him. His son's name is Abdullah. And Abdullah is, kind of a known figure in the Ummah because he's the son of a, prominent person. And, he was somewhat, they say that he was one of the Sahabis as well. He was a companion because, he saw the Prophet, he would narrate certain traditions. So he had some type of, let's say, famousness or infamousness, depending how you want to look at it. Abdullah ibn Umar decides to go and visit Imam Hussein alayhi salam on the night before Imam Hussein alayhi salam is going to leave Medina. And he wants to hear out Imam Hussein alayhi salam. He wants to hear why is he going, and he wants to give him some advice. Now, Imam Hussein alayhi salam is not somebody who needs to be given advice by the likes of Abdullah ibn Umar. But he's very patient with him. He hears him out. And at the end of this conversation, Imam Hussein alayhi salam has some advice for Abdullah ibn Umar. And that's the part that I want to see if I can take some lessons for. Abdullah ibn Umar, basically his message to Imam Hussein alayhi salam is that if you do this, then you are going to end up being a cause for blood being spilled, the blood of Muslims being spilled. And he says that I myself heard from your grandfather that you will be killed unjustly. So my advice to you is that you refrain from even going ahead with this plan of yours and just give bay'ah to Yazid, go back home and live a peaceful life. Now, even if you look at what this man is saying, it doesn't make logical sense, right? He's saying that I heard from your grandfather that you're going to be killed unjustly, and then he's telling him that you should make peace with the person who's being unjust towards you, right? It doesn't make any sense. But this is one of the characteristics of Abdullah ibn Umar, is that he was living in a delusion, and we're going to get to that. And it's a very important observation when we look at this, that you can have somebody who's prominent, somebody who has grown up with a Muslim upbringing, but whose thinking can be very delusional. It doesn't make any sense. What he's doing doesn't make sense. He's telling Imam Hussein alayhi salam that you shouldn't fight. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam has some advice for him. And he explains this advice in the form of two stories. Now, you all know that storytelling is a very powerful tool. And stories can often convey a lot of meaning that can be very relevant to somebody even beyond, that point of conversation. But one of the reasons why we use stories sometimes is because the party that we're talking to, the person we're talking to, is not willing to listen to advice. They're stubborn. They're arrogant. They feel like they're fixed on a certain way. And so they're not going to take advice. So storytelling can somehow be an indirect way to convey a message. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he assesses the situation, and it seems that he determines that the only way he can get through to Abdullah ibn Umar is through using stories. So he gives him two stories. This is Abdullah. I'm going to say the gist of the story. Story number one. You know that one of the most despicable things about this dunya, about worldly life, about the history of worldliness with Allah, one of the most despicable things is that the head of Yahya alayhi salam was severed from his body, and it was gifted to one of the very, let's say, you could say, spiritually polluted people of that time. Okay, that's story number one. Story number two, he tells him, is that Abdullah, do you know that there was a time when the Bani Israel, they killed 70 prophets between Fajr and sunrise? Now, we have to digest this, right? Even if somebody were to assassinate one prophet, it would be such a big deal, right? Imagine like a pure person who is sent by Allah to guide people, and somebody comes and they assassinate him. That would be tragic. But these people did what? They killed 70 prophets between Fajr and between sunrise. Imam Hussein is saying this. And then what they did is they went to their bazaar, they went to their stores, and they sat down and they started to buy and sell and talk business as if nothing had happened. So what is the state of these people? What is the message that Imam Hussein is trying to give here? One of the takeaways, at least, that we can take from this, and it's a very strong and important message, is that Imam Hussein is warning Abdullah about the spiritual disease of indifference when you just don't care anymore. Imagine that somebody could commit that crime and then it's as if like there's no blood on their hands. You know, the person who, one of the scientists, Oppenheimer, who was involved with the scientific, sort of design for the atomic bomb, right? One of the most terrible things that human beings have ever done. So here, this brilliant scientist is working on atomic bomb, and then he sees himself what destruction took place because of his efforts. And there's something interesting that I read about Oppenheimer, that because he was a famous scientist, he had the opportunity to meet the President of the United States on different occasions. And when he went to the President of the United States, like, you would think that he would be like a celebrity, right? A hero, because he helped America supposedly, end the war and win the war. But what he would tell the president is that, President, I feel that I have blood on my hands. So one time the President of the United States, apparently he gave a handkerchief to him. He said that, okay, wipe off that blood, right? Meaning that you got to be a little bit tougher here, right? Like, we won the war, right? We did the right thing. I mean, we can justify it because, it's America, and America is always great, and we need to keep America great, right? So we can kill, millions of people if we have to. It's not a big deal, right? Just wipe off the blood and get on with life. But this man, right, he couldn't be indifferent to it, right? There was something that was gnawing away at him. So Imam Hussein, to go back to this story, Imam Hussein is telling him that these people, they were at such a low point of their humanity that they didn't care. They committed this great crime and they were just completely indifferent towards it. And this is something which I think should give us pause to stop and reflect. That Imam Hussein is telling him that, Abdullah, like, this is something that could happen to you as well, right? You too could fall into this trap of being indifferent. And then he ends the conversation by telling him that, Abdullah, ittaqillah, have consciousness of God, wala tada'a nusratana, meaning do not ever leave aside coming to our aid and assistance. Meaning he's not giving Abdullah a free ride. He's not letting him off the hook. He's telling him that, Abdullah, right, you have a responsibility towards us. Right? In other words, I mean, he's not saying in those words, but he's conveying the message. I am the Imam. I am in need of help right now. Do not be somebody who abandons me at this time. What does Abdullah do? Right? This is super, super interesting in a way which is like, scary. Abdullah tells him that, oh, Imam Hussein, I want to kiss you in the same place that I saw your grandfather kiss you. So he said, no problem. So Abdullah goes and he kisses him on the chest. Apparently, our Prophet used to kiss Imam Hussein as an act of love on his chest. And then Abdullah begins to weep, right? He begins to cry. And then what does Abdullah do? Abdullah goes home and he writes a letter to Yazid, la'natullahi alayh, and he says that, Yazid, I give bay'ah to you. I'm in your allegiance. That's the story of Abdullah. Now this is something, again, which gives us pause. We have to think about this, that what is it that can lead somebody to indifference? And I think that when we look at ourselves, right, there's a lot of practical applications of that. What do I mean by indifference? I mean when we stop caring about those things that we should care about, right? When we stop caring about our individual spiritual progress, when we stop caring about our responsibilities towards our families, our societies, we stop caring about our relationships and improving them. We stop feeling this sense of urgency that we're here for a mission and we're supposed to accomplish that mission. We start becoming complacent. These are all signs of indifference. So inshallah tonight, I want to keep it brief. I want to just talk about one of the causes of spiritual indifference, and inshallah we can expand more tomorrow. Please help me with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So brothers and sisters, if we go to this story and this incident that took place, we see that Imam Hussein alayhi salam mentioned two stories. There was a story of what they did to Yahya, and then the story of the killing of the 70 prophets and the people just acting as if nothing happened, doing business like normal. We could say here that there's a connection between these two stories. In what way? If we ask the question that what is one of the causes of somebody becoming apathetic and indifferent, one of those causes is what's pointed out in the first story, which is that when somebody becomes infatuated with the dunya, when somebody becomes overwhelmed with their worldly experience and they don't have a proper interaction with it, it can cause them to become spiritually indifferent and spiritually apathetic. Now, this is an extreme case, right? Whatever was the reason behind the martyrdom of Nabi Yahya alayhi salam and somebody cutting off the head, right? That is an extreme case. But there can be cases which are less extreme, which can still lead to somebody becoming spiritually indifferent. It's interesting that Imam Hussein alayhi salam mentions that the head of Yahya, if you think about it, the best part of the body, right? If somebody loses a hand, or they lose a finger, or they lose a hand, they lose a leg, they're still going to be surviving. They're still there. But when they take off their head, that's it, right? The most precious part of the body is being gifted to one of the worst human beings on the earth, right? That's what somebody can get to when it comes to their experience with the dunya. So there's a beautiful dua that we're taught by our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi. Please recite salawat. It's one of those du'as that we're always looking for enhancing our prayers, and it's always one of the ways of doing that is by having a different du'as that we've memorized that we can use in our qunut. This is one of those du'as that's good to do that. In fact, I myself learned this du'a from one of the ayatullahs, one of the great ayatullahs who I had a chance to pray behind when I was a student in Qum. So he would use these beautiful du'as. One of them was this following, which actually is narrated from our Prophet. He would recite this du'a in the middle of the month of Sha'ban, 15th of Sha'ban. And perhaps you yourself, in your a'mal on the 15th of Sha'ban, you recited this du'a. What is the du'a? Allahumma la taj'al ad-dunya akbara hammina wa la mablagha ilmina. Have you heard this du'a? Perhaps you have. What does it mean? Oh Allah, la taj'al, do not make this world akbara hammina. Don't make it be the most greatest or the most important of our hum, meaning our efforts or those things that concern us. Meaning that do not let us be preoccupied with our worldly affairs above and beyond everything else. It's very delicately crafted, the wording. Our Prophet isn't saying that, oh Allah, don't make us be concerned with the dunya. That's impossible, right? Nobody could say that I'm done, right? I'm just going to go off into the woods and just be a hermit and focus exclusively on my soul and the akhirah. But the important thing is that, oh Allah, don't let me be preoccupied with my worldly pursuits in a way which is all dominating and all overpowering, and it becomes the most important thing of what I do. Wala mablagha ilmina, meaning that, oh Allah, I don't want the some extent of what I know to be limited to my worldly pursuits. Right? There's some people who are so good. They're so good at what they do. They're engineers, they're scientists, they're doctors, they're this, they're that, which is awesome, which is great. But is that it? Right? Is that all that I'm supposed to come into this world for, is learning about some technical aspects of this dunya, whatever it may be? Right? That can be useful, beneficial, praiseworthy, yes. But there's something else that I want to be learning as well. Right? These du'as are so instructive for us. They help to realign us on where we should be. So if we ask ourselves this question of what can make me apathetic, right? One of those things is when I don't have the right balance when it comes to my dunya. Okay, now what does that practically translate into? I'm going to give a few practical examples that I don't want to just talk, theoretically. Things that we can ponder upon, and perhaps we can use this as a way of considering putting in some changes in our life. I'm going to give you a few litmus tests tonight. Here's a litmus test for you. Very practical. If you ask yourself this question, if you ask yourself that in the last 24 hours, can you name three times in the last 24 hours where you felt grateful and appreciative of Allah's blessings upon you? Right? 3 times in the last 24 hours. Maybe for all of you here, you're like angels or better than angels, and you're like 3 times. I have 3 times in the last 5 minutes. What are you talking about, right? I don't know. But I think there are people who would be like, maybe someone like myself, where I'd be like, oh man, if I think about it, there's been a lot of times when I have been unhappy with my situation, and I kind of been like groaning and moaning and being like, oh man, this and that and that. But in terms of being like very sort of grateful and expressing that gratitude, I would struggle to come up with those 3 times, right? And you can answer the question for yourself, right? I know for myself that it's a question which I need to ask myself, right? Because maybe my nature is something which I don't see those things, right? Now, we all know that gratitude is a human virtue. Gratitude is something which takes us beyond our worldly experiences. But if I don't have this in my life, right, then that's a sign that I have some imbalance. لا ترى الجاهل, Imam Ali alayhi salam says, Nahj al-Balagha, لا ترى الجاهل إلا مفرطا أو مفرطا. It's a very important hadith. It says that somebody who is a person of foolishness will either be doing ifrat or tafrit, meaning that they're either going to be extreme or they're going to be falling short. So in this case, if I'm falling short on something which a human being should be doing, that's a sign, a warning sign. Question number 2. In the last 24 hours, can I name 3 times where I've experienced a special spiritual connection with Allah Ta'ala? Right? I'm not talking about like a formal, dry connection. Alhamdulillah, inshallah, we're all people who pray, and when we go and we just go through the motion, that's what I would call, in and of itself, it's a dry connection. But to make it spiritual, there has to be something else that goes beyond that, right? There's one time when you pray, and sometimes there's another time when you pray. You actually do that prayer and you connect. Have there been 3 times in the last 24 hours when I've connected in that way, right? And maybe I might be scratching my head and really struggling to come up with that. Now, I'll ask you one more question. Okay, in the last 24 hours, can you tell me, some of the delights of the dunya that, you have really experienced, right? And I think that if we think about it, we can say, yeah, that coffee that I had in the morning, the korma sabzi that I had last night, whatever it is, right? That's easy, right? Those are things that are easy for us, right? And sometimes when we start doing these exercises, we realize that maybe my preoccupation is something where it shouldn't be, and I have to realign, right? And if it's the case that the dunya is not my biggest concern, then when in my day do I have time allocated for otherworldly pursuits? Right? Obviously, I can't allocate the majority of my day for otherworldly pursuits, but at least some time should be allocated to it. Right? There should be some time when I'm trying to work on improving myself. There's some time when I'm reflecting on my flaws and trying to figure out what to do to improve that. There's some time when I'm building my connection with Allah on a daily basis. And these are simple measures by which we can sort of start to gauge where are we when it comes to our interaction with the dunya. Because Imam Hussein alayhi salam is telling Abdullah that, this spiritual indifference and apathy that these people have, one of those causes of it is that unhealthy preoccupation with the dunya. Inshallah, with the help of Allah, I want to continue this topic tomorrow and go into it a little bit deeper, talk about some of the other causes of spiritual apathy. But I believe that for tonight, this introduction was enough. Hopefully, I asked enough questions to spur us to think and reflect. And even if we can come out of these sessions with some thoughts about how we can, improve, then that, inshallah, is a blessing and our mission has been accomplished. Let's recite salawat, please. I want to end tonight's speech by mentioning a few words of the dhikr of Musibah of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Let's remember all those who have gone forth from this community and the other communities, and they've had the tawfiq and the great honor and opportunity to be invited to do the ziyarah of Arbaeen. And even though we're not with them, we know that our intentions and our good intentions and our spirit is with them, and inshallah whatever reward that they're going to be getting, inshallah we can also participate in that reward by at least connecting with them in our hearts. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdullah, Sallallahu alayka ya ibna Rasulillah, Sallallahu alayka ya ibna Amir al-Mu'minin, وابن فاطمة الزهراء. Peace and blessings be upon you, O our master Imam Hussein. Peace and blessings be upon you, O chief of martyrs. Peace and blessings be upon you, O the one who was killed unjustly on the banks of the Euphrates River while his mouth was thirsty. With the millions of Zuwar who are going to visit you in Karbala, we say with them tonight, Labbaika ya Hussein, meaning that we are ready, we are here for you, O Hussein. We say Labbaika ya Mahdi, we are here and ready for you, O our living Imam, O the Imam of our time. Even though we're not there, we can take our hearts to Karbala. We can imagine the scene of the millions of Zuwar expressing their love and their loyalty and mourning what took place in Karbala. Imam Hussein alayhi salam mentioned the head of Yahya the Prophet. Perhaps he was foreshadowing what they would do to the head of the wali of their time, his own head. The enemy soldiers did not content themselves with only killing in front of Imam Hussein's eyes his children, his nephews, his brother. They did not just stop there. They did not just stop at going and attacking the Imam of the time, the grandson of Rasulullah. They did not just content themselves with the arrows and the sword strikes and the stones that were thrown at Imam Hussein. But after all of that, they had to go and they had to sever the very head of Imam Hussein. That head of Imam Hussein, what a strange sight it was for the people, that the very head of the grandson of the Prophet would be paraded through the streets. The narration says that when the head was took to Kufa, the people heard something very strange. They heard it saying, أَحَسِبْتُمْ أَنَّ أَصْحَابَ الْكَهْفِ وَالرَّقِيمِ كَانُوا مِنْ آيَاتِنَا عَجَبًا. Do you imagine that the people of the cave, that they are among the signs, our signs which were strange? The companion Zayd ibn Arqam, who is in the court of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, he says that, O Hussein, but rather this is the strange sign. This is even stranger and more wondrous than the people of the cave, that the grandson of the Prophet, that his head would be paraded in public and treated like this. What sort of injustice did they do to the head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam? What sort of injustice did they do when it came to the treatment of that head, when it came to the ladies of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam? Imagine what a journey it was from Karbala to Kufa to Sham. Amidst all the pain and suffering of the journey, that the ladies and the children, if they looked up, they would see the heads of the martyrs. They would see the head of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. One narration states that when Zainab alayhi salam, that when she went to the court of Yazid in Sham and she saw the head of Imam Hussein, after the long journey, after all the suffering, after the hunger and the thirst and the torture and the strikes from the spears, that when she saw the head of Imam Hussein, she could not contain herself. She cried out, "Oh Imam Hussein, oh son of Makkah and Medina, oh son of Fatima, oh grandson of Rasulullah, this is too much to bear." This type of treatment of the head of the grandson of Rasulullah. Allah la'natullahi ala al-qawmi al-zalimin wa say'alamu alladhina zalamu ayya munqalibin yanqalibun.
صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله صلى الله عليك يا ابن رسول الله صلى الله عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء يا صار الله وابن صاره چشم گریان بهرت شام خراب آورده آی خیز ای لب تشنه از بحر تو آب آوردم حسین جان حسین جان ته دلت بگو حسین جان حسین. یه بارم به یاد رفیقامون که توی این مسجد بودن و دستشون از دنیا کوتاه شد. حسین جان حسین جان. رو سپید و رو سیاه مو سپید و قد کمان آی رو سیاه و مو سپید و قد کمان این همه سوغات از شام خراب آوردم این همه سوغات از شام خراب آوردم حسین جان حسین جان حسین خواهردانی که داغت با دل خواهر چی کرد حسین جان از اون لحظه ای که رفتی دیگه بر نگشتی قیام حرم غریبی رو احساس کردم بی برادری رو احساس کردم اومدم کنار بالینت اومدم کنار بدن بی سرت هرچی گشتم جایی برای بوسیدن نیافتم حسین جان حسین آمدم از شام ویران ای برادر ای حسین جان ای برادر ای حسین جان ای برادر ای حسین جان ای برادر آمدم از شام ویران ای برادر ای حسین جان ای برادر ای حسین جان ای برادر ای حسین جان آمدم از شام ویران دیده گریان و پریشان خون تکلم با یتیمان ای برادر ای حسین جان ای برادر ای حسین جان ای برادر ای خفته ای در خاک تیره از شیدن داد اینجا خیز و دلداری نمایی کودکان را خیز و دلداری نمایی کودکان را ده تسلا قلب این اطفال زهرا ده تسلا قلب این اطفال زهرا دردشان را کن تو درمان ای برادر ای حسین جان ای برادر ای حسین جان ای برادر ای حسین جان تو همان خون خدایی به ابی انت و امی تو همان خون خدایی به ابی انت و امی همه جا با شهدایی به ابی به ابی انت و تو حسینی که زشم شیر عدو با لبت شان در ره دوست فدایی به ابی انت و امی به تو به هر سینه صفایی، تو به هر ناله نوایی، تو به هر درد دوایی. به ابی انت و امی، به ابی نتوان گفت که بی غسل و کفن در یم خونی، نتوان گفت که بی غسل و کفن در یم خونی. تو در آغوش خدایی، به ابی انت و ام. تو در آغوش خدایی، به ابی. آی کربلا کربلا کربلا، جسم تو بگرفته در آغوش ولیکن چون خدا در همه جایی. به ابی انت و امی، به ابی انت و امی، به ابی. عشقت حسین، بفرمایید بشینید، اجر همتون با امام حسین. عشقت حسین تا به خدا میبرد مرا. آره والله اگه از ته دل عاشق امام حسین بشی خدا رو میبینی. به خدا قسم خدا رو میبینی اگه عاشق از ته دلت عاشق امام حسین باشی. خدا دست تو یه جایی میگیره که اصلا خودت فکرش نمیکنی. عشقت حسین تا به خدا میبرد مرا، یعنی که از سنا به سرا میبرد مرا. در کشتی نجات تو تا آرمیده ایم، ایمن زهر درد و بلا میبرد مرا. علی جان میخونی شما؟ نسألك اللهم و ندعوک باسمك العظیم الاعظم الأعظم جل الأكرم بدم الحسين 10 مرتبه یا الله. یا الله 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 یا رحمان یا رحیم یا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دینک واکفنا یا قاضی الحاجات و یا کافی المهمات انک مجیب الدعوات انک علی کل شیء قدیر. من فقط امشب یه دعا میگم، یه دعا. خدایا شب اول قبل اون لحظه ای که آخرین سنگ رد رو صورتمون میذارن، آقامون امام حسین به فریاد ما، حضرت زینب به فریاد خواهران ما برسان. خدایا ثوابی از این مجلس به روح همه اموات دوستان، آی موسوی، آی روحانی، آی شمع، یادم نیست اسم بقیه، همه اونها خواهران و برادرانی که تو این مسجد بودن ایشالله فیض برده باشند. خدایا ثوابی از این مجلس به روح همشون عاید و واصل بفرما. خدایا مریضا، اونایی که رو تخت بیمارستان خوابیدن، اونایی که دکترها جوابشون کردن، اونایی که مریضن، قلباشون مریضه، دلاشون مریضه، خودشون نمیدونن، خدایا همه رو شفای عاجل عنایت بفرما. خدایا ثوابی از این مجلس به روح همه اموات، بدوارثا، بیوارثا، اونایی که سالهاست تو این مملکت دفنن تو قبرستان مسلمانان، کسی یه بارم نرفته سر قبرشون یه فاتحه بخونه. خدایا ثوابی از این مجلس به روح همهشون عاید و واصل بفرما. و عجل فی فرج مولانا صاحب الزمان. السلام علیک یا ابا عبدالله، السلام علیک یا ابن رسول الله، السلام علیک یا ابن امیر المؤمنین و ابن سید البسین و رحمت الله و برکاته. صلی الله علیک یا مولا یا قریب القربا. السلام علیک یا معین الضعفاء و الفقراء. السلطان ابا الحسن علی ابن موسی الرضا و رحمت الله و برکاته. صلی الله علیک یا مولا یا صاحب الزمان. السلام علیک یا شریک القرآن. السلام علیک یا امام الانس والجن. عجل الله تعالی فرجه جميعا و رحمت الله و برکاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. والعصر ان الانسان لفی خسر الا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا